So how did they say they're going about generating this 52 billion?
I mean, three ways. You have the revenue component of the budget, the grants component of the budget, and the loans component of the budget. So revenue and grants are actually the normal sources of funding for the government. Loans are I always say, the necessary evil that the government sets aside and uses when the need arises. So when the government is not able to cover all of its spending through the projected revenue and grants, it will resort to borrowing. In other words, loans to cover for the deficit. So what happens basically when you look at this year's budget or next year's budget, 2025 more so, it's 2.7 billion. Now the government has to borrow to cater for that 2.7 billion domestically and externally.
That's deficit.
Yes, that's deficit. So to answer your question, basically it's three. Revenues, which basically we refer to as domestic revenues, tax and non-tax revenues. And then you have grants, program grants, project grants. Program grants are what we refer to as budget support.
Budget support.
It's around 3 billion.
That comes directly fiscal cash.
Details of that have to be obviously discussed, but as to how they come, the budget support or the project grants, that definitely the finance ministry will be able to explain that properly. But to add that all funds that are collected by the government or on behalf of the government must be paid into the consolidated fund at the Central Bank of the Gambia. So how that is done, probably they would be in the best position to answer that. Yes. So all of these components, when you look at it, obviously, tax is the highest. And strangely, the second highest is project grants. So this is a huge component of funding for the government. And this is the part that is shaky. It is so volatile that it is the reason our development is not working the way it's supposed to. Because over 64%, you could say over 60% to be precise, it's around 64, but over 60% of the development budget is tied to project grants. But now that is okay. That is okay. That is if you are getting the funds. If you're getting all the 64%, that's basically 12.64 billion. That is actually coming from foreign governments and international organizations. But the problem, as my brother has mentioned, is that when you look at the budget, they can project 12.64 billion and then they will end up realizing less than 100 million. Now imagine what I'm saying here.
Is that donor fatigue or maybe not
confidence in some. So many factors actually come into play, because obviously the logical thing that you can come to as a person would be, obviously they will not put the amount there if they did not get the commitment from the donor, right? So they must have gotten the commitment or the approval from the donor, right? That is the right thing to do, which is why even in one of our reports we talked about this a lot. And then one of the suggestions we made was that National Assembly members during the approval of the budget must make sure that every single project grant estimate inputted in the budget is vetted and then approved accordingly, but not just approved and left to be that way, left at the discretion of the MDAs that have inputted the amount. The National Assembly must inquire into it, ask the MDAs and ask them to provide, if necessary, commitment letters from the international organization so as to make sure that development budget is credible. As I am telling you right now, as I'm sitting here right now, the development budget is not credible. I can tell you that for a fact. Because, like I have already said, the major component, over 50% of the development budget funding is tied to project grants. And project grants are not forthcoming. It's been that way. It's been that way since, I can say, 2020, or even way back. But based on our research, what we have done, it has been that way. They will project over 10 billion, and they will not even be able to realize up to $500 million. That's even a stretch, because right now project grants for 2023, which is the new actuals that we have seen in the new budget column, it's around 52 million.
That's quite.
That's quite, and they actually projected 13.56 billion, but over 13 billion they projected, and in the budget what you are seeing is just 52 million.
So you see how unrealistic this is.
That is
So why do you think anybody will act like?
Now here is the question. I have two theories about that. I hope. Let me explain the theories too. The first one is that wrong projections. That's
Wrong
it.
projections.
Simple.
Well, not deliberate misinformation.
The second part would be that.
Yeah.
The second part could be that they actually received funds, probably not up to 13 billion, but they refused to report the receivals or the received amounts in the budget. That's why we are seeing project grant 52 million. But then us as the civil society and the public, what we can do is we report what we see in the budget. But my gut feeling, hopefully, is telling me, I hope my gut feeling is right, it's telling me that they are receiving more than 52 million, they're just not reporting it in the budget. I hope that's the case. And if that is the case, if they are receiving billions of dollars on behalf of the Gambians and not reporting, that's one thing. But the second thing is, if they are receiving billions of dollars for developmental purposes, why are we not seeing development? Mr. Sani has already explained that too. Now, when you look at the government, it's usually about, sadly, it's usually about hours. And that hours comes from or relates to the recurrent budget. The recurrent budget is for the management, running of the offices of the central government.
That comes in personal emoluments.
Yes, that comes in personal emoluments, use of goods and services, subsidies and transfers, capital expenditure. But please, now the issue with the recurrent budget is that it is almost always 100% tied to government local fund. Now, you know what government local fund is? Government local fund is the combination of all the tax revenue that GRA collects, non-tax revenue, and then domestic borrowing and budget support. So these four constitute the government local fund. Now, but the problem is 33.3 billion of this proposed budget that we see is all allocated to recurrent expenditure, including debt service of 11 billion. Now that means 22.29 billion is the one for recurrent budget for running of offices other than debt service. So 22.29 billion of all of it is GLF, which is the most secure one, the most guaranteed source of funding for the government. All of it, 22.2 or 3 billion is actually for recurrent expenditure. Now, the recurrent expenditure, sadly, for this year is projected to be more than the development expenditure. Now, development, we are talking about development, building of schools, building of roads and bridges, building of hospitals, improving parks, right? Irrigation infrastructure. We're talking about all of this. And you're telling me that the central government offices are more expensive to run than the spending that is to be done on all of these sectors of the
So
economy.
virtually,
That's strange.
the monies we are guaranteed to get
Yes,
all goes to maintain us,
not all,
to maintain the running of the government.
not all, but mostly most of it.
Most of it. The ones we are guaranteed we can get will go to maintain
Government
our
local
offices
fund.
and
debts.
Yes,
Unpaid debts, because
That is why-
obligation.
that is-
So the ones that we are not guaranteed to get
Yes.
is what we project
Yes.
can go to the government.
That is why when you look at the budget,
You see?
that's why when you look at the budget, you realize that the difference between the projection for recurrent expenditure, especially the recurrent expenditure that excludes the debt service, that particular recurrent expenditure. That, debt service is a form of recurrent expenditure, so they try to exclude it sometimes. I'm talking about the one that doesn't include the recurrent expenditure. That alone, usually the difference between the projection and the actual is between 700 million and 800 million. 700 million and 800 million. If they project 13 billion, they will likely collect, or they will likely spend 12.2 billion. But they can project 13.5 billion, which is the case for 2023. They can project 13.5 billion and end up reporting 50 million or 52 million in the budget. You see the discrepancy right there. It's almost as if the development budget is the poor child who is orphaned and is left in the care of someone, a mother who doesn't really care about that kid at all. Yes, that's how it looks
That's
like.
how development looks
And that is scary.
Yeah,
that is scary.
And yet